hey, I frequently run into um, really crazy cases of just how limited and poorly thought out a lot of supplement research is. And I thought kind of the best way of highlighting it would be to look at some things that should have been developed but haven't been. So the first thing, I mean, oh, here's something. So N-acetylcysteine, it was thought it was going to have a lot of clinical level effects, but then there's this really big problem where it hits a song. Now the song effect, the possible origins of it are not that mysterious because cysteine isn't even the rate limiting factor in glutathione production. Glycine is. So there's a very natural built-in song that should be expected. There's only been a couple studies combining glycine and NAC for some reason. No attempt to see if it gets around the song. But what they did instead is they developed something called N-acetylcysteine ester. It's about 20 to 30 times more bioavailable or something like that. But it has the exact same song. So, and I just found this kind of crazy because since the problem was the song effect, there was no reason to yet really prefer a more bioavailable version of it. And because the route they're missing would be so obvious to a supplement user. They're researching supplements as if they're kind of medical drugs, not in terms of stacks or multiple use. 90% of studies are on just a single supplement. So I just think that's a pretty big miss. But another example, the stuff that hasn't ever been researched is pretty damning. For example, there's been lots of speculation, and what makes Okinawa the highest lifespan country in the world. Well, although there's lots of books claiming to be about the Okinawan diet, unless they're telling you to eat pretty much nothing besides a Japanese purple sweet potato, then it's probably wrong, because around 70% of calorie consumption at the time was actually from Japanese purple sweet potatoes. So that is by far the main longevity factor in their diet, since it's most of their diet. And there's barely any look into its health effects. There's only a couple looks into use of ubu as a supplement, even though there's obviously reasons why it would be connected with lifespan already showing up. One of them is, anthocyanins tend to be the strongest plant antioxidants. It's high in them, just as suspected with a purple plant, but it's actually got a more stable, really unique form of anthocyanin in it. One thing that's cool about it is it actually has color changing effects in water, kind of like blue butterfly pea. But it's a really unique, really anthocyanin that could hold up better in the body. So there's, the links are not mysterious, and yet it's never been researched, even though they say we're trying to imitate everything from there. Another thing is the way turmeric has been researched is really strange. We started researching it single use as an herb. It's turned out that a lot of the initial studies that got it researched were fake. And what this has meant is basically that and then we've discovered, later that you actually need to do other things with it to increase the bioavailability. If they had looked in if they looked at or taken seriously any of the ways it was used in its actual context, then they would already know this. But perhaps the biggest thing that's annoying they ignored. It's part of why they were interested in curcumin. Besides the role in Ayurveda, it's also turmeric tea is used all the time in Okinawa, and it's actually always fermented turmeric. There's literally, you can buy some online, but there's like one study into the effects of fermented turmeric ever done. So they're just not taking. Once again, it's like they're developing a pharmaceutical where they think you can only use one thing. They're abstracting it completely from its context and not looking at how it was actually used. But would fermenting turmeric actually do something for it? Well, first of all, we know that the bioavailability is bad, and it's bad partly because it's difficult to break down many kind of plant cell walls. And fermentation, at the very least, if it does nothing else, causes lysis. But there's also a whole slew of new chemicals that can be produced. And my hypothesis about the role of fermented turmeric in Okinawan health is that they likely switched fermentation forms when they industrialized it. Lactate fermentation, it was the only type of fermentation where it's been described to how to do it on a mass basis. So when they industrialized it, I think they switched to that. But the native forms of fermentation in Japan, they do lactate fermentation. But even more popular than that is Bacillus subtilis, as in like natto. And what's really interesting about this is one of the Alzheimer drugs that's based on a turmeric analog that's been developed is T006. It's the update to J174 that makes it a lot more bioavailable. And what it actually is it's actually a curcumin analog bound to nattokinase, which is produced by natto fermentation. And you could actually make a natural T006 if you did natto fermentation of turmeric. Likely they're similar enough molecules that it probably combines in a similar way. So I just wonder if they may have been doing this at the time, since this has been discovered to be, whether it will have clinical results in Alzheimer's or not, it's at least useful as a preventative and stuff.